She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not throw her phone or fall apart on the kitchen floor. When the photograph came through, her husband and her business partner, champagne in hand, matching tropical leis, smiling like they had already won, Scarlett Ross did something no one expected. She opened her laptop. She navigated to an encrypted folder she had been building for months. And she smiled. Because while they were busy celebrating their betrayal on a Hawaiian beach, they had made one catastrophic mistake. They had sent the message at exactly 11:43 at night. And that timestamp? That was the last piece she needed. Here is the truth this story carries. The people who betray you quietly are rarely as clever as they believe. And the people they betray are rarely as broken as they hope. Stay for every second of this story. Like the video if you felt that chill, share it with someone who has ever been doubted, and subscribe to the channel because we promise it only gets better from here. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team to bring you stories with genuine meaning and lasting lessons.
The text was a scalpel. I chose Ethan. You're obsolete. I appended the image, the two of us, the champagne, the dawn of a new order, and deployed it. Her reply was a single datum. Stunning. An algorithmically perfect chill. She couldn't grasp it. This wasn't an exit. It was an acquisition. She was Meredith Vance, the architect of recovery. But this was a system I designed to be unrecoverable. Her world was triage and logistics, deploying assets and securing government contracts. Aegis Recovery was her spouse, not Ethan. He was merely branding. She built it all from ash, a monolith of pure function. I studied its architecture for 3 years, and then I located the single point of failure. I memorized the legends, the broken-down F-150 and cold cans of soup. That same relentless drive was the vulnerability I needed to exploit. She is a master of structural integrity. She could diagnose a failing support beam from a satellite photo, except, I calculated, in her own executive suite. I am Delaney Cross, her COO, her successor. People call Ethan charming, a useful tool. When she hired him to humanize the Aegis brand, the variable was introduced. He was her emotional firewall. I was the logic for her legend. I made her empire ruthlessly efficient. She was the mission. I was the strategy. But a strategy requires a goal. Then I arrived, a prodigy of systems analysis, lean and precise. Meredith saw a high-performance asset. Ethan saw a co-conspirator who spoke his language. I operate on risk analysis and legal dominance. Ethan's trust was a low-cost, high-yield investment. Our merger was a calculated inevitability. That text wasn't a confession. It was a press release for our new reality. The Maui photograph was the prospectus. Us, on that lanai overlooking the future. We held the champagne flutes. I toasted our success. Ethan looked like a man who had finally taken control. Because I had given it to him. My smile was pure ROI. We were the rational actors, escaping the irrational queen in her glass tower. The emotional shock was a necessary first strike to ensure a swift surrender. I had not factored in her response. No frantic calls, no fury. Just that one optimized word. I felt something other than victory, a system error. I envisioned her observing the photo not as a wife, but as an opposing analyst, cataloging data points with that unnerving, cryogenic calm of hers. She put her phone down, I am certain, and resumed her review of quarterly reports. The implication was staggering. This wasn't a new conflict for her. I told Ethan she would break. It was crucial for asset management, but I knew Meredith Vance doesn't break. She reorganizes. Her silence wasn't shock. It was strategy. The affair was tactical. The hushed calls, the off-site strategy sessions. We thought we were executing a covert operation. We were performing for an audience of one. I analyzed the timestamp. 11:43 p.m. her time. 5:43 p.m. ours. A detail I had chosen, and Meredith Vance lives in the details. The timing was a strategic detonation. It felt precise, elegant. Now it feels like we willingly walked into a designated kill box. The entire maneuver was designed to trigger an emotional cascade failure. We were banking on her being a woman first and a CEO second. We needed her compromised. Our play for the board depended on her being seen as emotionally volatile. We needed the grieving, abandoned founder. We thought that text was the conclusion. I am beginning to understand she processed it as the mission start time. 13 years ago, she was a girl in a stifling Atlanta warehouse. That environment coded her for survival above all else. She is not breakable. Sentiment is a fatal bug, she always said. A crisis requires a cold hand. At some point, she began applying that protocol to us. Over the years, Aegis became the gold standard. When systems failed, they didn't call for help. They called my boss. That authority came at a cost. By the time the valuation hit 9 figures, her humanity was a closed system. She ran on caffeine and adrenaline. There was no bandwidth for Ethan. He gained access when she was 33. Isolated, brilliant, and I now see, constantly running threat assessments. She would never admit a vulnerability. He met her at a fundraiser. She looked armored in her evening gown. He told a joke and she laughed. It was a momentary breach in her firewall. He got past her defenses. He introduced chaos and inefficiency into her life. He believed he was saving the woman from the machine. Then Aegis scaled. The bureaucracy was overwhelming her. I appeared. At the time, she saw me as a system upgrade. I saw Meredith's operational tangle and streamlined it in 20 minutes. I spoke the only language she still trusted, absolute sterile competence. She was nearing a breaking point. She made me COO, her second in command. Her gratitude was the vulnerability. It was the critical error. In retrospect, I see how her relief was her undoing. She was so thankful for Ethan's softness and my precision that she lowered her own defenses. She put him in charge of client relations. She granted me full access to the company's server architecture. She handed us the entire operational framework. She gave me signature authority, unfettered control over operations. She left us to manage the company. She gave us the time and the tools. She didn't just give us the key to the server room. She built the server room around us, then watched the monitors to see what we'd do. The constant screen-down posture, the compartmentalized data, the extended site inspections. We thought we were concealing an affair. We were populating her database. A 3-day trip to assess a high school. It was statistically absurd. When she'd inquire, Ethan and I had our synchronized responses. We thought we were managing her perceptions. Then the board pre-briefs we thought she was excluded from. A sudden silence when she entered my office. We thought we were seizing power. She was gathering intelligence. Meredith had a way of looking at you, of making you feel like a line of code she was debugging. She'd frame my ambitions as insecurities to test my reaction. This was never about Ethan. It was always a game between us. I never felt a knot in my stomach. I felt the cold, clean thrill of a hostile takeover. That whisper was the proximity of the endgame. I was building my own network inside her system. I told myself that sentiment was a liability, just as she did. I sidelined my own risk assessments because the probability of total victory was too compelling. My anxiety wasn't a side effect of success. It was an ignored system alert warning of a superior counter program. Now the glow of my phone illuminates the truth. I didn't hand her the hammer. I was the hammer. I leveraged Ethan's emotional access to her. I used her trust as the key to the kingdom she built. I broke the cardinal rule of systems warfare. I underestimated the architect. 3 years. That's how long I studied Eleanor Vance, charting her weaknesses like constellations. She believed loyalty was an emotion. I knew it was a variable to be managed. My first move wasn't a whisper, it was a number, a single perfect line item planted in her books. I personally keyed the first vendor payment late one evening, a routine approval she'd never notice. It was a test of her systems, a stone dropped into the placid water of her oversight. Pacific Ridge Advisory, a name I invented over a $90 scotch. It was the perfect ghost in her machine, the recipient of a $50,000 fee that would serve as the cornerstone of my entire narrative. She would find no contract, no paper trail, only a digital invoice and an authorization chain I had meticulously designed to lead directly to the conclusion I wanted. The architecture was flawless. The first signature belonged to Ben Carter, my eager head of media, a junior manager justifying a brand campaign he wasn't even aware existed. He was the perfect pawn. Ben couldn't approve a catered lunch, but his request gave me the opening. I applied the final signature, using the C-suite authority Eleanor had so trustingly bestowed upon me, her own power, repurposed. I built a financial bypass around her entire executive team. They were all focused on the grand vision, her grand vision. I, however, have always found power in the details they're too important to notice. Let her find it. Let her instincts scream. My next move was already deployed, a piece of digital bait, a narrative of personal betrayal designed to shatter her composure before the board. The reservation was a work of art, an oceanfront villa in Maui, for two. Synced to an old cloud account I knew her sentimentality would never let her delete, a ghost on her own family tablet. I scheduled it 4 months in advance, deliberately clashing with a Vegas conference I knew she'd attend. I had even argued against her going, feigning concern. Every detail was a perfectly calibrated insult. She wouldn't rage. Her profile indicated a retreat into cold, methodical planning. I counted on her quiet fury. I needed her in the shadows while I operated in the open. Her call to Mara Duval was the first tripwire I'd laid. Bringing in a corporate shark confirmed she was reacting, not acting. She was playing her part in my script beautifully. She'd hire a forensic accountant, some bloodhound like Elias Trent. Let him sniff. The trail I'd laid, the invoice, Ben's server access, all pointed to a simple, sordid story of greed and infidelity. For 7 months, the duplicity was intoxicating. I was the loyal COO, flawlessly executing her strategy, while she played the wounded victim, gathering the very evidence I was feeding her. I knew Elias was tracking my digital footprint. Every login, every file transfer was a performance for an audience of one, painting the exact picture of rogue ambition the board would need to see. While she chased the $50,000, I was rewriting corporate bylaws. The fraud was a smokescreen for the real work, burying clauses that consolidated executive power directly under the COO. I was architecting a legal framework to render her authority obsolete, to make her signature a formality. Ben's digital tracks all over the financial servers were the final flourish, the perfect accomplice. His job was producing marketing fluff. His presence in our financial vaults was an absurdity so blatant it could only be perceived as a conspiracy. My conspiracy. She was building her dossier, her North Exit file. She thought she was a detective uncovering a crime. In reality, she was my unpaid paralegal, assembling the exhibits for her own termination hearing. She would frame it as wire fraud, espionage. So dramatic. This was never about an affair, it was about funding a corporate coup. The hotel stays were strategy sessions. Every move was executed with the cold precision of a surgeon. This wasn't personal. This was the systematic removal of an obstacle. Eleanor was the obstacle. The affair, the villa in Maui, it was all theatrical misdirection. It wasn't a lover's retreat. It was the forward operating base for my victory, paid for with her capital. She would see thieves. I saw a hostile takeover. Her trust wasn't the crowbar. It was the key she had willingly placed in my hand 3 years ago. The clock on my screen read 11:45 p.m. My assault was pre-programmed. The smiling photograph from Maui was 60 seconds from the chairman's inbox, 1 minute to detonation. The end of a 1,000-day campaign. My fingers were poised, not with anger, but with the sublime calm of absolute victory. I didn't need to write a new email. My resolution to the board was drafted and ready. I opened the portal to send it. Access denied. The first crack. A fatal, impossible error. I tried the contracts database. Blocked. The financials. Gone. My entire C-suite profile, my digital existence, had been excised from the network by a command from a higher authority. My power hadn't just been suspended, it had been erased. My files, my authority, All of it vanished into the ether. Then I thought of the money, and a cold dread began to form. I tried the corporate treasury portal. A new directive was in place. A hardware security key was now required, irrevocable. I didn't have a key. Any wire transfer over $25,000 now needed her biometric approval and a countersignature from Mara Duval's office. She had severed my access to the company's blood supply. I couldn't move a dollar. My coup was suddenly, inexplicably, unfunded. My power was gone. Then her surgical precision turned toward my primary asset. A text from Ben. He was locked out. Everything, servers, cloud drives, archives, was gone. She was dismembering my operation. But she wasn't just being strategic, she was being personal. I had put him in a corporate apartment secured in Eleanor's name thanks to an ironclad prenup. His frantic texts confirmed it. His keycard was dead. She had wiped his digital access, changed the codes. He wasn't just unemployed, he was on the street. She was liquidating my assets, both corporate and human. Then came the system-wide email alert, the move I had planned as my own checkmate, a full enterprise-wide legal hold. It was a digital lockdown. Every server was frozen, every account mirrored. The crime scene was sealed, but the narrative was no longer mine. I couldn't delete a single piece of my plan. The evidence was now locked in amber alongside hers. She had defended, and now she was attacking. A board meeting alert appeared on my phone. Then, a text from her phone. 2 words. It's done. A clean surgical cut. The champagne glass in my hand felt like a lead weight. Simultaneously, her email landed, CCing the entire board and me. It was devoid of passion, a masterwork of corporate speak. Pure, calculated, and utterly devastating. She flagged a conflict of interest, a threat to the company. She was using my playbook against me, word for word. She had anticipated everything. My phone began to light up with calls from panicked board members. My face, reflected in the phone's dark screen, was a mask of cold shock. She'd been running a parallel operation the entire time. The bubbles in my champagne were gone. There would be no more communication, only lawyers. I looked at the glass, a monument to my own profound arrogance. Every argument I had was now a liability. Every move would be a desperate defense. I stood, the warm Maui air clinging to my skin like a shroud. The resort lights glittered below. Paradise. My hand tightened on the railing. Thousands of miles away, the world I had built was being systematically erased. I had profiled her as a brilliant but sentimental founder. I saw a queen and never thought to check for the assassin hiding behind the throne. This was never my story to write. It was always hers. At 3 a.m., my summons went out. The emergency board meeting was set. Phase 1 was live. The agenda item: making Catherine Pierce an honorary founder, my beautiful corporate eulogy. Jackson's part was flawless. The wedding photos flooded the feeds, a perfectly timed wave of joy. Our narrative was simple: a stable new guard versus an emotionally compromised founder, her judgment gone. While I perfected my boardroom speech, Jackson confirmed my access was live. I watched her phone records. She was calling our key accounts, a pathetic attempt to contain the damage. I could almost hear the panic. Trying to douse a forest fire with a cup of water. At 3:30, we joined the call, our victory drinks hidden. The board looked grim, funereal. Then our camera lit up. We were tanned, glowing. Then Catherine appeared. She wasn't shattered. She was granite in a charcoal blazer. A cold dread began to pool in my stomach. I pushed past the unease and launched my script, a symphony of manufactured concern. Catherine is in crisis. Her ability to lead is compromised, I continued. For the firm's protection, I propose a leave of absence. The company cannot be at risk. I will assume the role of acting CEO. A pause. Then her voice, like steel. Are you done? Before I could respond, a new face. Eleanor Vance. Good morning. I'm personal counsel to the founder. As the chairman began, Vance cut him off. Before you hold this litigation bait vote, please see Article 4. The founder's written consent was required. The full board couldn't override it. You can't call this vote, Delaney. I felt the trap snap shut. "She's unstable," I stammered, my voice thin. A new voice appeared. "The instability is in your accounting." A flow chart bloomed on screen. "I'm Marcus Thorne, an independent auditor. I found irregularities from the COO's office." He was a scalpel. He pointed to the consulting fees. "Unauthorized payments to Pacific Ridge Advisory, fast-tracked by Ms. Cross. And," he said into the vacuum of silence, "a catastrophic conflict of interest, a direct breach of her contract." "Ms. Cross," the chairman's voice was ice. "Are you running a slush fund?" "It's a lie," I screamed. "A vindictive trick." Catherine leaned in. "I didn't need to be vindictive, Delaney. I just needed to read. You thought I'd be too busy crying." The chairman was swift. "Motion dismissed. The COO's authority and access are frozen. You're suspended, Miss Cross. You will speak to no one." The call ended. The sun felt cold. I finally saw the brilliant, horrifying architecture of her plan. It was never just about the affair. Jackson's photos were bait, a script to make us expose our entire strategy. She needed us to see her as a victim, blinded by our arrogance while she prepared the kill box. At 10 that night, my burner phone rang. I expected my lawyer. It was an unknown number. A single terrified message from a woman ordered to destroy files. The sender was Chloe Bennett, my assistant. A ghost. A piece of office furniture who was never supposed to think. She booked our flights. She filed the expense reports. She was a function, not a person. A tool. The tool had a conscience. She wouldn't have come to me. I knew with absolute certainty who she messaged. Catherine was gathering her weapons. I could see Catherine's reply. No comfort. Just an address to a law firm where Chloe's fear would be forged into a warrant. I pictured it. Chloe, a nervous wreck in a sterile conference room, holding the drive that could send us to prison. I could feel Chloe's hands shaking, hear Catherine's predatory calm offering her protection, promising her safety. And Chloe would sing. She would give them everything. She'd tell them how I called, screaming, ordering her to delete it all. In my panic, I gave an order assuming she was too scared, too dependent to disobey, a fatal misreading of a pawn. But she didn't delete it. She copied it. And now Catherine had the entire scheme on a secure laptop in a lawyer's office. Every chat, every email, and the presentation. Our arrogant, beautiful presentation. The one we called phase shift. The Maui trip wasn't our celebration. It was our indictment. It labeled the wedding photo a psychological trigger. This wasn't love. It was a strategy memo. To defeat Catherine Pierce, I didn't need an army. I just needed a photograph, a perfect psychological entry point. While Jackson managed her heart, I focused on the board and the money. I called it aggressive vendor commissions, funneled through Pacific Ridge, a loyalty program for contracts Catherine was too principled to win. We were playing chess. She was playing checkers. The plan was a masterwork of precision. I handled the corporate strategy. Jackson managed the emotional sabotage. I never dreamed a forgotten audio file would unravel it all. I remembered Jackson making that recording. The thrill in his voice as he sent it to me, a strategic analysis from the man inside her life. A perfect weapon. His words were so clinical, so correct. "She won't get angry when she sees the picture," he'd said, confident. "She's too controlled. I know her playbook." He was an expert on her pain. "She'll retreat," he predicted. "By the time she recovers, we'll control the board." His analysis was a monument to our collective arrogance, mistaking her trauma for weakness. The CEO could handle corporate betrayal. But the wife? That recording, played for her in a cold legal office, would be the razor between her ribs. The one place she had no armor. Jackson had taken her deepest fears, her horror of humiliation, her instinct to go silent under attack, and handed them to me as a blueprint. This wasn't a coup. It was a vivisection. I can visualize Catherine in that moment. The controlled breath, the mental fortress door bolting shut. Then, her eyes opening to see Jenna Hayes, the quiet assistant, likely weeping. Mark and I, the two people she built this company with, had become the predators. And this girl, an organizational ghost, risked everything on simple decency. I imagine Catherine's lawyer, Eleanor Grant, sliding a contract over, a federal whistleblower deal, a shield for the one variable I never bothered to calculate. They can't touch you. Then Catherine's voice, cold as forged steel. You don't work for them anymore. You work for me. And the most invisible person in the company became the asset that would burn it all down. But we didn't know. In Maui, we were still celebrating the kill. Our counter-offensive launched in the court of public opinion, where emotion is currency. By Tuesday, my voice was on some podcast, dripping with engineered sincerity. I painted Catherine as a brilliant but unstable founder who'd lost her way. I said our partnership had become toxic, that I had to leave to innovate. A masterpiece. I was the wounded visionary. She was the corporate despot. Simultaneously, Mark's face was on a business magazine cover, a triumph of narrative engineering. The article ignored the affair, ignored the fraud, and recast his betrayal as a brave stand for progress. A brilliant mind escaping a toxic environment. We weren't conspirators, we were reformers. We branded a hostile takeover as a corporate rescue mission, and for a moment, it worked. The market applauded. Investors backed us. We had seized the narrative. They expected Catherine to fight on our terms. A defensive video, a leaked email. She was supposed to perform the role of the publicly disgraced founder. She did none of it. Her silence was a strategic void. It was the first thing that felt wrong. We were shouting into a vacuum, and it felt like a trap. We read her silence as surrender. It was ordnance being loaded. She wasn't fighting for public opinion, she was building a legal case. While we did press, her lawyer prepared 3 data packets. The first went to the board. It wasn't a story, it was a timeline. A cold ledger proving my relationship with Mark went back over a year, a fact we'd strategically omitted. It placed our hotel receipts beside board meeting minutes where we co-signed major budgets, a flagrant conflict of interest. This wasn't personal, it was about fiduciary breach. The second file was the kill shot to our story. It contained the entire money trail from our vendors, mapped by an accountant named Ethan Cole, into Blue Harbor Consulting. It showed the 6-figure wire for our security deposit in Maui. It detailed every dollar siphoned to pay for this champagne, this view, this new empire. Our innovation fund was just systematic embezzlement. The third package was for the Department of Justice. Jenna Hayes hadn't just talked, she'd copied the entire server. The file contained immutable metadata logs showing Mark frantically backdating contracts after the board had put him on leave. A digital smoking gun. This was no longer a boardroom dispute. This was felony evidence tampering. The ground didn't just shift, it vaporized beneath our feet. Within 24 hours, the financial blowback was catastrophic. 2 school districts, clients with 8-figure deals, froze every project Mark had touched. Our narrative vanished. An insurance syndicate locked an escrow payment for a hospital project, demanding a full audit. The cash flow stopped. The phone calls stopped. The support evaporated. The board, terrified of liability, firewalled us from the company so fast it was stunning. Mark and I thought we were fighting an emotional battle against a scorned founder. We believed charisma and a good story would be enough. But as the legal notices arrived, the truth was brutally clear. She wasn't fighting with emotion. She was dismantling our world with the terrifying, sterile power of fact. We learned too late that a podcast is no defense against a time-stamped server log. The true horror wasn't the strategy. It wasn't the fraudulent invoices or the stolen funds. The true poison was in the quiet betrayals. On Mark's laptop, Catherine's team found the proof. I wasn't just Mark's partner. I was his spy inside Catherine's inner sanctum. For 18 months, I had violated her trust, entering her private office. I photographed her private journals, her strategic whiteboards, and I found the encrypted voice recorder she kept in her desk, a weakness I'd noted long ago. 5 years of audio diaries, recorded on her therapist's advice, her raw confessions about her deepest professional fears. I took them all. I gave her soul to her enemy as corporate intelligence. I handed Mark every password, every transcript, every vulnerability. This was the hostile acquisition of a human being, and I was the key asset. We dissected her triggers over dinner. We reverse-engineered her psyche, looking for the input that would guarantee system failure. Her trauma response was the key. We knew she would retreat, internalize, and avoid a public war. The plan was perfect. One photograph from Maui, detonated publicly, would make her collapse inward. But Mark, my brilliant partner, always planned for contingencies. A polished whistleblower packet was on Jenna's old drive, a masterpiece of fabricated compliance charges against Catherine, ready to be deployed anonymously. The Charleston hospital bid was the centerpiece, a falsified claim I helped craft, accusing Catherine of rigging the deal, the perfect character assassination. We knew the company was all she had. Mark's strategy was to frame Catherine so completely she would have to resign to save the company's name. One angry email from her, and the trap would spring. Catherine would have lost me, her reputation and the company she built over 13 years. For a second, I felt a flicker of something, a ghost of my former self. But victory is costly. I remember waiting for her reaction that evening, just after 6 Atlanta time. I imagined her in her office, the external storm mirroring the internal one I'd created, a cinematic finish. I saw her gripping her desk, knuckles white. The affair was a simple wound. People have affairs. That part was almost trivial. The art was using my intimacy against her. I was the one who knew her vulnerabilities best. I weaponized every confidence she had ever shared. I knew every weakness. I guided Mark's attack to the most fragile parts, the old wounds I once pretended to protect. I saw her, finally broken by the one person she trusted. It was cruel, but necessary. But the hours passed in that Maui suite, and the explosion never came. The silence from Atlanta was absolute. My certainty began to decay into a low hum of dread. The questions we expected her to ask herself: was I not good enough? Did I push too hard? Were the pillars of our psychological warfare. We banked on her self-destruction. Her silence was off script. It felt wrong, a miscalculation. A new question, a sharper one, formed in my mind. Why was I letting an ambitious man compromise my own flawless strategy? My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. My pact with Mark was unbreakable, but for the first time, I wondered what I'd broken in myself. This was supposed to be a partnership, not just a coup. I told myself remorse was a useless emotion. We were building an empire, and empires are built on scorched earth. But the silence felt less like a victory and more like an ambush. For 3 years, Catherine Sterling was an open book I had memorized. My future was a fortress built upon the blueprint of her weaknesses, and I saw the path to it with perfect, crystalline clarity. This was never about love. It was a leveraged buyout of a human soul. Power was the only metric that mattered, and as the Maui champagne filled my glass, I knew the board would soon recognize its rightful owner. Her silence following the detonation was the first anomaly. I had predicted a storm. I got a vacuum. Ethan grew agitated, whispering that I had pushed her too far. Then the first hairline crack at 9:15, an email from my counsel. Our offer was a masterpiece of magnanimity. Catherine would resign, forfeit her equity, and disappear. A bloodless coup. In return, the Pacific Ridge ledgers would remain a ghost. Her attorney, Mara Vance, replied with a single, weaponized word: no. I watched Ethan's face crumble. I felt curious. It was an illogical move. This was her only viable exit. The data was irrefutable. Exposure meant obliteration. A cold knot of professional curiosity formed in my gut. Why wasn't she behaving like the subject in my case study? 4 hours later, the cease and desist landed. A formal, tactical maneuver. The triumphant tone of my morning memos suddenly seemed amateurish, naive. I watched Ethan fall apart. He messaged her directly, a pathetic appeal to a history I had weaponized. The conqueror I had married was dissolving into a panicked child. He groveled, then pivoted, blaming me, painting himself as my pawn. It was a vile, predictable move from a weak asset. I watched him type, fascinated by the velocity of his self-destruction. He tried to frame himself as the victim, an absurd narrative. His self-loathing was a useless byproduct. He kept texting, a series of unforced errors that were quickly becoming a liability. Mara Vance filed his texts as attempted witness tampering within the hour, a beautiful, efficient countermove. His pathetic emotionalism was now Exhibit B in their case against me. Then came the work of their forensic accountant, Elias Trent. $2,400,000. He had unwound my Pacific Ridge structure with a speed that suggested he knew exactly where to look. The condo, the wedding, my entire legal firewall, all funded by a strategic reallocation of Palisade capital. I had used the company's own assets to finance its salvation. The precision was my signature. As the deposition began, I knew the data was compromised. Then they called their witness, Tessa Grant, Catherine's quiet, invisible assistant. I barely remembered her, a ghost at a keyboard. She calmly testified she'd overheard my strategic sessions with Ethan. She had recorded dates, times, and objectives. Her direct quote hung in the air. My objective was to ensure Catherine walks into the room bleeding out. A crude but accurate summary of the strategy. It was never about love. Tessa's testimony reframed my strategy as premeditated malice. My affair wasn't a human failing, it was a hostile tactic. The chairman saw the ledgers, heard the quote, and initiated a kill switch. Emergency arbitration, 9 the next morning. No courts, no appeals. A corporate tribunal. My meticulously planned 48-hour timeline had just been compressed into a single, brutal day. That night, the warm Maui air felt like a tactical flaw. My certainty had evaporated, replaced by the chilling realization that I was operating with incomplete intelligence. I watched Ethan stare into space while I sanitized our devices. The silence between us was no longer strategic, it was the sound of a failed operation. The fear was purely intellectual. I wasn't facing a scorned woman. I was facing an opponent who had been running a counter-strategy, using my own plan as a roadmap to my destruction. The arbitration room was a sterile box designed for corporate executions. I sat beside Ethan, flanked by lawyers. A purely mathematical assessment told me we were out-resourced. Catherine entered. She wore a simple black dress projecting an aura of absolute control. Her eyes met mine, and I saw no emotion, only the cold, placid certainty of a player who has already checkmated her opponent. I felt the room's atmospheric pressure shift as I walked in with my new husband, Ethan. My access to the board's inner circle, my currency, had vanished. The sickening lurch was the feeling of a calculated risk turning into a catastrophic failure. The chairman, Mr. Davies, gave a curt nod to Mara Vance. I had braced for an emotional diatribe. Instead, I was met with the cold, precise language of securities law. She painted a portrait of fiduciary negligence, a conspiracy to gut the company. Then, Elias Trent illuminated a spiderweb of financial charts. It was an autopsy of my Pacific Ridge operation. He traced the cash, my bonus structure, our life. He demonstrated how hundreds of thousands were diverted from our vendors into my advisory shell, then used to fund the Maui operation. He proved we had financed the coup with Catherine's own money. I watched Ethan's face turn a blotchy red. I tried to object, but Mara silenced me with a timeline synced to a deposition from Tessa Grant. Mara then displayed the forged ethics forms. Digital timestamps proved they were created just 3 hours after the wedding photo went public. A sloppy tactical error, born of haste. I hadn't been tying up loose ends. I had been frantically fabricating a defense from a hotel room. Then Mara displayed the title slide from a presentation copied from my hard drive. The words, phase shift, filled the screen. My words, my plan. Mara narrated my strategy back to me. Use the wedding as a psychological bomb, seed the media, and seize her chair in 48 hours. This wasn't about us. It was a hostile takeover, and Ethan was the delivery mechanism. He broke. He shot out of his seat, pointing at me, his voice cracking as the lie disintegrated. He claimed ignorance of the finances, that I had manipulated him. He was attempting to jettison me to save himself. A predictable but useless maneuver. Mara didn't flinch. She just clicked to the final slide, a screenshot of his text from Maui, my strategy, his words. Do not worry about the blast radius. She is too proud to scream in public, so she will just break beautifully, and we will walk right in. The silence in the room was absolute. The board members, men I had managed for years, stared at me with pure, undiluted contempt. I sat down. The trap sprung. My own playbook had just buried me alive. Mr. Davies didn't pause. The vote was unanimous. I was terminated. Stock clawed back. Credentials revoked. Security escorted me from the building that had been the entire focus of my life. The board then allocated the company's legal war chest for Catherine to pursue us for fraud and collusion. But before they adjourned, she made one final statement. She had spent the morning on the phone with the 3 major clients we'd lost. After explaining the new audit controls designed to detect my exact methods, all 3 renewed their multi-million-dollar deals. The crisis I architected to expose her weakness became the platform to demonstrate her strength. The fortress never trembled. By noon, I was erased, locked out of my life. My contracts were nullified. My name was now synonymous with corporate espionage. I had lost an empire and now faced a future being dismantled by lawyers. I ended up in a motel by the airport. I pictured Catherine in that boardroom, the sun setting, the mahogany table gleaming, alone and in complete control. I saw her not as the beautiful tragedy I had scripted, but as the builder she had always been. A sickening wave of analytical clarity hit me. I understood the brutal elegance of my defeat. We sent that text from an island, believing it was a kill shot, but what we actually delivered was the time-stamped, authenticated evidence she needed to permanently lock us out of her world. This story is an autopsy of a failed strategy. My single greatest miscalculation was this. I spent 3 years studying my target's weaknesses and not a single day appreciating her strengths. That was the only variable that ever mattered.